Hey folks, this is John Miller, Executive Editor with WB News. We would like to welcome you to Ask the Experts, featuring John Halderman of Beacon Wealth Management. John is the founder, owner, and certified wealth strategist at Beacon Wealth Management. You can find out more at bwmwb.com. And now live from the studios of the Exponent Telegram in Clarksburg, West Virginia, let's Ask the Expert. Welcome to Ask the Expert. Today we are joined by John Halderman of Beacon Wealth Management. Welcome, John.
Thank you, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing well today, and I tell you what, we are going to talk about a subject. In the old days, they would call it the third rail of politics because you never wanted to mess with Social Security because politically it's bad news.
Yeah.
So, but there's been an awful lot of discussion about Social Security and its impact, whether it's an entitlement. We've all been paying into it. So let's talk Social Security, its purpose, its future, and more importantly, what can people do to supplement their retirement in the future?
Well, you know what? I want to start out by saying Social Security, in my eyes, is definitely not an entitlement. And I say this because we pay into it. I mean, it is a paid benefit. And I think it's an amazing paid benefit because when you think about it, you pay 7.5% of your gross salary into it. You get it for retirement. You get it for disability. You get it for death, for your income, for children. So there are so many good benefits for Social Security. Now, the unfortunate thing is so many people have to rely on it as their sole source of income in retirement, which I don't believe it was ever designed to be that way. But I do believe that anybody who paid into it definitely should be concerned that in the future, is it going to be there in the way that we believe it should be?
So along that line, because there's people our age, my age, whatever the case may be, that have thought, okay, that's going to be enough to get me by. But obviously that's changed a lot and everything. Is it ever too late to start getting ready for that day as far as investing?
No, absolutely not. I mean, Social Security is going to be about 1/3 of what you previously made when you were working. And so the one thing I always tell people is don't get caught up in thinking that it's too late. Because I don't care whether you're 20, 30, 40, or 50 or have 5 years left. It doesn't really matter because any money you save is going to be to your benefit and it's going to add to that Social Security benefit. One of the big mistakes that I see with Social Security, though, is the beneficiary part of it. People don't realize that you might get Social Security and your spouse gets Social Security. But what I call the Social Security cliff, and that is that when one of you pass away, one of your Social Securities goes away. And so, whichever one's the highest one is going to be the one that you actually keep. But I always tell people, though, if you're both had a decent one and it's gone, well, that's going to impact your lifestyle. And so what you got to be thinking about is, hey, what do I do? What's my surviving spouse do when they lose one of our Social Securities? Because you still need to be thinking about how do I replace that income? And that's a big, big thing that people just don't even think about because they think, oh, my children are out of the home, my debt's down, but they're using both of those. And if you're using them, you got to be thinking once one of them's gone, how do I replace that?
So what's the best thing for people to do to prepare themselves for that?
Well, a couple things. Either number one, they can either continue to save more money and build up accounts, retirement accounts that they're not using, that once one of the spouses pass away, that they turn it on then. I call that the post-Social Security retirement income. Another thing is thinking about, okay, do I need life insurance still? Because too many times people cancel their life insurance once their children are gone, not realizing that their spouse is relying upon that income. And so it in itself could be a big deal. And then I always tell people too, the benefit of the life insurance in addition to helping your spouse is you could be using it as a wealth transfer tool. So there's lots of techniques and strategies that would make sense. But the biggest thing is you got to sit down. You got to sit down and you got to say, okay, these are things that I need to address. What am I going to do? And what's the right thing for me as an individual? Because too many times we get caught up thinking what our buddy did or what we heard our cousin did. I think that's one of the big mistakes in planning in general is because, someone will say, well, my grandfather did it this way. Well, I'm not trying to be funny. That's 40, 50, 60 years ago. That's like saying your grandfather's phone that he used is the same phone you're going to use. I mean, doesn't make any sense. It's a start. It gets the conversation started. But you got to make sure that your strategy is modernized to the rules of today, the economy of today, and all the things that are applicable for today's times in general.
Well, we've talked about the importance of sitting down with someone like yourself, someone who has that background, somebody who has, you are there to help them, okay? But you're distanced enough to look at the whole picture and help guide them in the right direction. I mean, what's it take? I mean, we've talked about this before, but I want to emphasize, we're not talking, it's not like giving labor. It's going to take a little bit of work on their part, but
it's easy. It's easy. The biggest thing is I was talking to a friend today at lunch, and he said, hey, look, he goes, I've known you now for 10 years. And he's a professional that I had met through construction. And he said, he goes, during that 10-year period, he goes, I knew what you did. And he goes, but I'd had my own advisor in place for years upon years, a great guy. But he said, but you know what? He goes, I came to a couple of your educational events. I came to a couple of different things. And he goes, and what I started seeing over and over is consistency, consistent and credibility. And he said, and gradually, one by one, I started realizing that you communicated with me more than my existing advisor, because we had put him on our communications list. And so he started getting our weekly insights. He started getting invited to different educational events and different things. And he said, you know what? He goes, even though I loved my old advisor, I realized the day came where even though I loved my old advisor, your knowledge, your relationship building, your fiduciary responsibility, I had to sit there and say, am I missing out? And he goes, and when we did, he goes, what I realized was now I have a strategy in place that's not just for investing, but it's also for estate planning. It's also for tax reduction. It's also in case something happens to me. And he said, so from my wife and my perspective, we feel 100% more confident that if something goes wrong, we've got a strategy in place. Whereas before, we had some investments, but the investments were great, but we just didn't have the whole strategy. And I said, so what did it take? He goes, it took me to actually bring things in. He goes, I was even a little reluctant because he goes, I wasn't for sure if I wanted someone locally to know. But he said, but it's no different than having a heart problem. If you have a heart problem, you got to address it and you got to go to the doctor. And if there's an expert in our community where right here we can talk about it, why not? Because he said, it's been unbelievable from the standpoint of being able to call your whole team. Anybody on your team has been very knowledgeable, can answer questions for us.
When we were talking there earlier, I was thinking about the analogy when you said, your cousin or your friend or something. And I'm like, well, you're not going to call your cousin and your friend if you're having brain surgery, you're having a health issue. You're going to go to an expert. And that's the important thing is people need to realize at this point in time, if you're talking or thinking retirement, get in with somebody. John Halderman with Beacon Wealth Management, an excellent choice. There's others out there. John will tell you that, sit down with you and spend some time with you and talk about what's important to you, and then it'll help you craft the perfect plan.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what it's all about is you got to take that initiative to schedule, because if you don't schedule, it's like going to that first workout. We all know we got to work out, but we're reluctant. And, and for whatever reason, we're intimidated, we're, whatever. But once we get there, we realize, wow, that wasn't as bad as what we thought. And that's the same thing is I tell people, let's talk, let's schedule a discovery session, let's get to know you. And then once we understand you and we understand your situation, we can start breaking things down to see are there ways we can add value. But none of that happens unless we have the initial discovery session.
Again, thanks for joining us, John. Any parting shots?
No, that is the parting shot. I mean, when I say this, you've got to schedule. You've got to sit down because, like I said, I can have all the wisdom and all kinds of things. But if it doesn't get transferred in an actual action plan to where it can be applied to your strategy, it becomes irrelevant.
Again, John, thank you very much. Great advice. Thanks for joining us on Ask the Expert. Until the next time.